Welcome to Willow's Green Permaculture. Today I'd like to talk to you about how we organize our seed sowing to grow all of our vegetables for the year. So as you can see here, we have most of our seeds. They're organized by a category of, let's say, what we will plant together around the same time. Now, they're not organized by precise date because the way we do our sowing is we follow the moon cycles. What that means is anything that's a root vegetable, an onion or a beet or a carrot, those we will tend to plant the period after the full moon, and before the new moon we will plant root vegetables because that's when the water is basically descending down into the soil, and so it will encourage excellent root growth because the roots will go deep down into the soil looking for the water. And then anything where it's a fruiting vegetable, where, for instance, something like corn, anything where it's going to be above ground, what you're harvesting, pumpkins, etc. Those we will plant, so the period between the new moon and the full moon, because at that time the water, with the coming full moon, the water is being pulled up into the flesh of the plants, and so they are going to grow taller, and they're going to have a lot of water and nutrients in their leaves and their fruit and so on. And so that is when we plant those types of vegetables. And so because the moon cycles vary, it's not precise dates. It's going to vary by a few days every year. And so that's why, for instance, a couple of years ago, I started using this garden journal, which is really nice because every day I'll add observations in it, what's going on. And so as I look, for instance, if I'm taking notes today for today's date, which is it's January 22nd today, I'm going to see, for instance, I've already got written down that I want to sow my onions soon because I'm going to be sowing them after we're going to have the full moon in a few days on January 25th. After the full moon, I'm going to be sowing my onions. I'm going to be doing some indoor sowing. And so I've got that written down. And as I take notes, I'll look at the several days coming up, and I'll see what's going on. As well, at the beginning of this journal, there is a planting record, which I put in every year. It's several pages of as I sow things, I'll put the date. And so, for instance, when we look at last year, around this time of year, so I can see here that on February 9th of 2023, that's when I sowed my onions. I'm sowing them a little bit earlier this year because I want to give them more time to develop. I just got my first grow lamp, and last year I planted them in the garage by the window, and it was just a little too cool in there. They took a long time to sprout, so I got a grow lamp this year to start my onions because I really want to improve my onion growing, and I'm gonna sow them at the end of this week. So this is really useful for helping us to keep organized as far as the sowing is concerned. And like I said, I organize the plants by category of what is planted together. So for instance, or type of plants. So for instance, here in this big container, we have all of our peas and beans and fava beans and so on. Now, they actually aren't at all planted around the same time, but we just have so many peas and so many beans because it's a real staple here. We grow a ton of peas and beans that I just keep all these seeds together because we put the beans and the peas everywhere, inside the garden, outside the garden, because they're not only great to eat, but they're very attractive plants. And they feed the soil as well. So we plant them everywhere. So we've kind of got a category of them all their own. So these are also, for instance, here's a jar of peas from last year that I collected the seeds from. Here's a jar of fava beans. And here's a jar of regular pole beans. And here's another one. And now I've got them separated into different jars depending on where they grew last year, because I like to see the different conditions, and so I separate them by jars that way. And in these beans, I've got some coriander here because they do well when planted by the beans. For instance, back here we have a bunch of trays here of different seed packets and collected seeds of all of our cold weather vegetables, the ones that we're gonna plant outside first, and also more or less plant inside first. That includes the onions here, which are also cold weather vegetables, because they tolerate cold weather quite well. And these are in their own little pack because I'm going to start these this week. But then apart from the onions, we have things like we got kale, collards, lettuce, cabbage, beets, kohlrabi, parsley, carrots, and turnip, rutabaga. Beets, for example, and also cabbage, I will start those in the greenhouse first, because I like to give them a little bit of time. They're very slow growing, and I call them very polite vegetables because they let the other vegetables have their space. And so I like to start them in the greenhouse first, in order to get them a little bit grown a little bit, and so that when I transplant them outside and I give them the space they need, they will grow into that space much more quickly, and then I won't have to deal so much with weeds. The other thing is, these are not only organized for timing, but also what we plant together. So for example, I will plant carrots at the base of or around the base of my cabbage plants, because they're really good companions. The carrots develops the root underneath, the cabbage develops its head up top, and the carrot, because it's a very aromatic plant, it will repel the pests of the beets, of the cabbages. And so I plant them together. So that's, and also around the same time, which is really nice. And so that's why these are all together. And then over here we have all of our tomato seed. And also with the tomatoes, we also have got the ground cherries, because they have around the same, they need the same conditions as the tomatoes. And then here we have all of our peppers and eggplants and so on, and then a few other herbs that go really well with them. Like for instance, this is cepiche, a really nice herb that I'm actually going to also plant around my tomatoes, because it's really good at keeping some of the pests away. And then in this box we've got all of our warm weather vegetables. For example, we got basil in here, chamomile, flax, and things like okra, Malabar spinach, and also some warm weather chicory. I have chicory over here with the cabbage as well, because there's some chicory that you can plant in the cold, and then there's other chicory that you need to wait until it warms up before you can plant it. It's interesting that way. And so these are all the seeds that you kind of need to wait until it's really warm out before you start planting them. I do some of them in the greenhouse and some of my direct sow. Often the same plant too. I'll direct sow some okra, but I'll also put some in the greenhouse. And then over here we have watermelon and the cucumbers, which have very similar needs. And then over here, all of our pumpkin and squash. As you can see, there's some collected seed, and there's some seed packets. They're all together. And then now it looks like there's a ton of seed. Obviously, I'm not going to be planting all this, but I keep seeds, and I'm always experimenting to see how long the seeds are good for. I mean, seeds can last. Certain types of seeds, they can last years and years, if not decades or centuries or even millennia. In fact, there's a clay pot right here that I keep some old seeds that I don't use anymore in. I keep them in here as a reminder of how seeds used to be kept. And in the a few years ago, there was an archaeological site where there was a clay pot that was discovered, a closed up clay pot, and inside it there were some squash seeds, and it was from I think a couple thousand years ago, and those squash seeds grew, and so that's quite something. And then down here we've got some, for instance, this I've just brought from our dining nook area, because these are a bunch of seeds that over the last few weeks that I've been bagging up after they're good and dry. So we've got some squash here, and some peppers, and some watermelon, and some winter watermelon. What else? We've got some hemp seed here. So a lot of different seeds here, which is but I haven't organized them into their trays yet. Down here I've got our grain, different types of grain. So I've got corn packets of corn seed, and collected corn seed, and some sunflower, which we plant around the same time as the corn. And then over here we've got some sorghum in packets and collected. We got amaranth, we got wheat, barley, what else? Rice. We got rice in here. So all sorts of different types of grains. That rice I will start in the greenhouse in mid-April, and some of the grains as well. I will start some of them in the greenhouse, and then others I will direct sow. Corn generally I will direct sow because it's very, very fast. Beans I will also direct sow because they grow very fast. Peas as well. And squash as well. I'll do it direct sowing. This here, this is a map that I had created in December of 2020 after our first summer here. I really wanted to really do some experimenting with companion planting. You can see the shape of our main garden there. What this map doesn't have is the contour all around it. But that's because I had already planted that contour and it was full of perennials, so I didn't really need to plant anything. This map, however, is I've had questions about it. Can we get a real good picture of this? The thing about this map is when I created it, I went a little bit overboard in the detail, and I just tried to fit far too much into the garden. If you try and squeeze too much in, I do like to fill the spaces so I don't have to deal with weeds. But if you try to put too much, then your plants just aren't going to grow. You don't give each plant enough space. What is really important, however, is to have those different herbs and companion plants around the garden, because they will help the vegetables. They will help repel the insects. They will help attract the birds and attract the insects as well that are beneficial, and which will all help the vegetables grow. And then some with companion planting, some vegetables help others simply because of the qualities of each. Like, for instance, tomatoes love carrots and carrots love tomatoes. They just love to grow together. In fact, there's a book that I really like by Louise Riott, Riotte, and it's called Carrots Love Tomatoes. It's a really good book about companion planting, and I really, really recommend that book. So here, I've just put these post-its on here to remind me of what I'm going to be putting in. So for instance, TS is Three Sisters. So right in the center here and right here, we'll be putting Three Sisters. And over here as well, the Three Sisters. So that's the corn, the beans, and the squash all together. Although in the center here, there's also potatoes that are going to be growing, because 3 years ago I planted potatoes here, and a type of, it's called the purple Peruvian fingerling, and they come back every year. It's impossible to harvest every last single little one of them, and so they grow with my Three Sisters every year, even though I only planted them once. And so you might say there are four sisters there. In this area, we're going to have cucumbers, carrots, beets, and peas, and everything that sort of goes with them, rutabaga, kohlrabi, etc. And then over in this area, there are going to be peppers, and in this area, there will be potatoes. And then down here, which is, as you can see, here's the compass rose. So it's basically a north-south axis here. So this is north and that's south, more or less, west, east. And so this is the southernmost portion of the garden. And it's where we got lots of our heat-loving plants like basil and Malabar spinach and okra, ground cherries, etc. And then here, it looks like a small spot, but this is where we put half of our sorghum for the year. Here and maybe a little bit here. It's amazing how little space sorghum needs. Here we've got some what we call walking onions. They're onions that come back every year. They walk because they grow these little onions at the top of their stems when they're instead of flowers, and those onions eventually fall over and plant themselves. So it's like the plant is walking away from itself. And we're going to have all the plants in the cabbage family mixed in with the onions here. So cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower, and so on. And this is another area over here where we're going to have onions and cabbage and broccoli and cauliflower, etc. And then back at the base here, we're also going to have separate from the onions because they don't like peas. Peas and onions don't like each other. So we're going to have peas back here, and in front of the peas, we'll have things like cabbage and cauliflower and so on, and then more closer to this area, we'll have onions and garlic, etc., mixed in with more cabbage and broccoli and cauliflower and so on. Here's where we're going to have our tomatoes, and back here it's more peas and so on, and back here as well. And this is also where we keep our compost pile. So there it is. That's roughly the plan for the garden this year. To remind me of what needs to be planted, I just look back in my journal. As each week comes, what am I going to have to plant next week? In December, I will look at all my seeds and I'll see what I need for next year. What did I manage to collect? What did I didn't manage to collect? Is there any seeds that I need to buy? And so every December I'll buy a dozen or so packets of different seeds. It's also good to kind of, it allows me to experiment as well with different items. Now, I've had a lot of questions about planting a permaculture garden, and what I'd like to say is if you're new to the idea of doing permaculture or growing all your food, or you want to do that eventually, that my advice for you would be to start as soon as possible with a very small garden. And you can really do it anywhere. If you live in an apartment and you have a balcony, you can do it on your balcony. Or if you live in an apartment and you don't have a balcony, sometimes you can ask the landlord if you can have a little spot outside. And also, some municipalities have community garden plots available, either for a very small fee or for free, for people who don't have access to a place where they can do their vegetable gardening. You've got running water and you've got a nice sized plot where you can grow a lot of your vegetables for the year. If you have access to an area where you can do some gardening, then I suggest you start small, grow a few things, and experiment with companion planting, because it really is an effective way to help plants to grow better. And to control different pests and so on. Like that book I suggested, Carrots Love Tomatoes. It's a small book, but it's really, really practical. It's a really good guide for different plants that you can plant together that will help each other out. And that's what we do. So for instance, in this garden here, like I said, and you've seen this in perhaps one or two other videos, there's the contour that goes all the way around the garden that has herbs and wildflowers and let's say thorny shrubs like raspberries and roses and so on, which with the roses we grow to get the hips because we can make jam out of the rose hips. That's one example of companion planting. But even inside the garden, we'll do the same thing. So I mentioned, for instance, the three sisters. You got the corn, the beans, and the squash. They help each other out. The corn provides a vertical growing space for the beans. When we do our three sisters, we will put a teepee up. Like we'll put roughly three, sometimes four stakes that are about as tall as the corn will be, and those stakes will support the corn. But what they're also going to happen is the beans won't only just grow up the corn; they'll also grow up the stakes, and at the same time they'll wrap themselves around the corn stalks. And so on a windy day, the beans will, because they are anchored onto that teepee, because they've grown all around, they've spiraled all around all of the stakes. And they've also spiraled around the corn plant. They'll hold that corn plant up. And not only on a windy day, but for instance, sometimes we get squirrels or raccoons that sometimes go into our garden. And if they go and take a cob of corn, well, if that corn stalk isn't anchored, they could pull the plant down. But if it's anchored, it stays up, which means all they get is the cob. And normally when animals go after a corn cob, they're going after it when it's still juicy, which means it's not finished growing. It's not ripe. A ripe corn cob, like a corn cob that's finished growing according to the plant, according to the mother plant, is when it's starting to dry. That's when it's created seeds that will survive and be able to grow. That's when the plant is satisfied that it's grown its corn, and then it'll stop growing more corn. But if an animal picks the corn cob while it's still juicy, well, it hasn't dried yet, which means it hasn't created seeds yet, which means the plant will put out more cobs of corn. They won't be as big as, let's say, the first two or three that they put out, but it'll still put them out if you still have time in the season. And so that system really works. Now, we minimize that because the third sister in the three sisters, besides the corn and the beans, is the squash. And squash vines are prickly, and so the animals don't like them. And the little animals don't like to crawl through squash plants or above them or whatever. And so we make sure that we grow pumpkins and squash thickly around our corn and our beans, and those are the three sisters. And the other element there are the beans. Corn is a plant that absorbs a lot, takes out a lot out of the soil, but the beans put into the soil. So they've got bacteria that grow on that are sheltered in nodes in the roots of the beans. And though these bacteria are able to take the nitrogen from the atmosphere and fix it into the soil in a form that the plants can then absorb and use and eat. And so the beans feed the corn and the beans feed the other plants. And that's why we put beans and peas and fava beans everywhere, all over the place. So that's one example of companion planting. Another one I had mentioned was carrots and tomatoes. Another thing I like to put around my tomatoes is basil. What else? For instance, onions and garlic are really good to have in the garden because we plant them around our cabbage and around our kohlrabi and around our cauliflower and so on, because they will repel all the bugs that like those plants. Now, however, we don't plant onions or garlic close to our peas or our beans, because they don't really grow well together. Peas and beans don't grow well close to onions and garlic. So, you know, if you're getting started on vegetable growing, I encourage you to, you know, even in a small space, mix it up and try companion planting, because you'll see that the things really grow well. This is an example of a great companion plant. So this is a passage jar full of yarrow blooms. Yarrow is a great plant because it's a very pretty flower. It's a great plant because it repels deer. If you live in the country, or if you live in an area that has a deer, the deer really don't like it. And this plant grows really, really well, and you can surround your garden with it. And the other advantage of yarrow is, well, actually, it's got two more advantages. First of all, it's a plant that's really good for your health. You can dry the flowers and dry the stems and the leaves and so on, and you can make tea out of it, and it will help prevent things like a cold or a flu. But what's interesting is it's not only good for the human immune system, it's also good for, and there's a different word for it for plants, but basically it's good for the plant's immune system as well. And what I mean by that is plants that grow around yarrow do better. They have stronger defenses because of the presence of the yarrow. So it's really an excellent plant to have. It's also a great plant. People who talk about permaculture will often talk about comfrey, planting comfrey, because it's a green mulch. What that means, a green mulch is you can, rather than getting wood chips or straw or whatever, you use the leaves of a plant or the stems of a plant, and you put that at the base of all your vegetables to keep the moisture in, to keep the weeds down. Comfrey's good for that. But comfrey isn't the only plant that's good for that. And if comfrey isn't native to your region or whatever, then it's good to have other plants. Yarrow is a great plant for that, because you can also, you can grow lots of yarrow and then cut the stems and so on, and then put them at the base of your plants and use them as mulch. So not only will they help keep the weeds down, because it's like mulch, like using straw or wood chips, but also because of the nutrients inside that plant, they will feed not only will they mulch your plant, but they will feed it with important elements that it needs. There are lots of plants that you can do that with, and in fact, another one that's really good for using as green mulch is dandelions. So obviously, you don't want to put the dandelion seeds in your plant, but if you have lots of dandelions around your garden or whatever, and they've already flowered, they've already, the seeds are already gone and so on, but the plant is still there. You can pull that plant and put it at the base of put the pulled plant at the base of your vegetables. And those leaves are going to be full of nutrients. Why? Because the root of the dandelion goes very, very deep. And so it gets minerals and other elements out of the soil that other plants don't have access to. And so the leaves of the dandelion are full of all of those nutrients, and they will feed your plants. Lots of wild plants are good for that. Mullein is another one. Lots of the plants that will often grow wild that people will consider weeds are actually quite good for that purpose. And so, if you look up green mulch and plants that are good for green mulch in your area, you can learn a lot about that too. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed the video. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. It's just a lot of fun to find out the kinds of things that you want to know. It gives us ideas about other videos that we can make. And if you're waiting to start a garden, don't wait. Start something really small. If you feel like you need to wait to start something big, well, then start something really small and start learning. Have a great day.